Hello friends and welcome to CEC live lectures. In the ongoing series on conservation of medicinal plants, we have already discussed there has been an increased usage of medicinal plants which has put a tremendous pressure on the natural resources, and therefore there is a dire need for the conservation of the medicinal plant species, not only to maintain the ecological balance but also to preserve the biodiversity, also to preserve the important species of these plants which are used for their medicinal or the therapeutic purposes. And therefore the global agency like WHO has framed certain guidelines for conservation of these important species. We discussed that these guidelines are broadly categorized on the basis of four major objectives, which are basic studies, utilization, conservation and communication. We discussed about the basic studies, wherein we saw that how the relevant information about the medicinal plant species is collected, how that information is catalogued, or how databases should be prepared by different agencies or the herbariums, national herbariums that have to be established by the government. Then we move on to the second aspect, that is the utilization of that information which was collected during the basic studies. And using that particular information, one can easily decide which medicinal plant species can be brought under cultivation, or what type of modifications can be done in the agricultural methods to improve the yield as well as quality of the medicinal plants. So in continuation with the utilization of that particular information, we will now further discuss various other aspects of these guidelines. So as per these guidelines, they also suggest that plant breeders should breed more uniform, higher yielding forms of the medicinal plants. And whenever we talk about the breeding of the medicinal plants in order to improve their overall characters, then we are talking about the genetic manipulation that has to be incorporated into the species which are desired to have better yield or desired to have more uniform yield. And these genetic manipulation are basically done to improve the traits of the plant species. When we talk about traits, these can be in the form of better yield, and this yield is both in the form of the vegetative yield vis-a-vis also the yield of the bioactive secondary metabolite that is present in the plant. These improved traits also can be in the form of resistance towards the disease or the pest infection. So whatever genetic manipulation is required, whatever the desired genes are to be incorporated into the plant species, they can be done in order to make that particular plant species resistant toward the diseases or the pest infections. Further, these genetic manipulations or the breeding techniques which are used to improve the traits, they also help in reducing the variability between the plant species or within the plant species. This kind of plant breeding or genetic manipulation is also done to get the standardized plant material, because whenever there is incorporation of the desired genes, there is reduced variability within the species, and therefore we get the plant material of uniform quality, of uniform safety aspects as well as the quality aspects. Now, such kind of modification also increase plant adaptability towards the soil and climatic conditions or the variations that occur over the geographical areas, and therefore such kind of plants can grow in a wide range of conditions over the wide range of geographical area, because we know that with the change in geographical area there is change in the soil conditions, there are changes in the climatic conditions, and therefore such kind of genetic manipulation or the breeding systems, they should be designed in such a manner that we increase the plant adaptability towards this varied condition either of soil or of climate, so that the same plant which was earlier having a limited area of its growth, which grows in a limited geographical area, can now have a wide range of wide geographical area for its growth, thereby increasing the overall population size of that particular plant species. Then these guidelines also suggest that cultivation practices should minimize the use of chemicals. So irrespective whether we are talking about the conservation of medicinal plant or we are talking about the better cultivation practices or of any other crop, whether it is a food crop, whether it is a ornamental plant, nowadays lot of stress is being given on the reduction of the use of the chemicals, and these chemicals can be in the form of the fertilizers which are used to enhance the growth, or they can be in the form of pesticides or herbicides or weedicides which are largely used to protect the plant from different kind of pest. So the bottom line is one should always be motivated towards certain practices that lead to the reduction in the use of these chemicals which are used during the cultivation either of medicinal plant or of any other crop. These guidelines also suggest that botanic gardens and horticulture institutes should provide effective horticultural training and information. So because these institutes are competent institutes, these institutes have competent people who are scientifically equipped enough to incorporate the desired changes in the medicinal plant species, to study these medicinal plant species through the scientific aspects, and these people are not only competent for research but these are competent enough to guide, to educate the people, to provide training to the people who are involved in the cultivation business of these medicinal plant. So the prime duty is not only to do the research but also to educate the people who are involved in this business so that they can cultivate the medicinal plants in a better manner. They can cultivate medicinal plant to increase their yield. They can cultivate medicinal plants with to increase their quality as well. So these competent people who are working in these research institutes to improve the agricultural method, to improve the overall databases that are being formed in these institutes, they should also educate the people, they should also educate the concerned people in order to overall improve the cultivation of the medicinal plant, and they can assist in achieving the goal towards the conservation of these medicinal plant species. Now the second aspect under utilization is to ensure the collection from the wild is sustainable. So as we discussed, that first objective is to bring maximum number of the medicinal plant species under cultivation, whether they are having a high volume of trade or they are endangered. So one should try to bring as many as medicinal plant species under cultivation. But this is not sometime always possible to bring each and every species under cultivation, and therefore some of the medicinal plant species required by the industry are still collected from the wild sources, and therefore sustainable collection should be the prime objective of the agencies. The agencies should always educate the people towards the sustainable collection practices. I have shown two images on the slide. As you can see on the first picture, you will see that the bark, suppose for example a medicinal plant is used for its bark. Now you can see a bark has been collected, has been ripped out from the stem in a circular manner across the diameter of the stem, whereas in the second picture you will see the longitudinal peeling of the bark has been done. Now we know that bark is mainly composed of the phloem tissue, and this tissue is responsible for the transferring of the nutrient material over the air to the other aerial parts of the plant. And once you peel off the bark across the circumference, across the diameter of the stem, you are cutting the connection of the stem region with the above aerial parts. Thereby you are cutting the supply of the nutrients which are collected by the roots and pass on to the aerial parts. You are cutting that connection, and therefore these nutrients are not properly passed on to the aerial parts, which will eventually cause the damage, severe damage to the tree, and if this kind of practice continues, eventually the tree will die out. Whereas if we peel the bark in the longitudinal manner, then on the one side, first on the one side of the stem, then after some time we will again peel small piece of bark longitudinally on the other side of the stem, thereby allowing the first area to replenish itself, to allow to regrow the bark, and thereby preventing the severe damage to the tree. In the second picture you can see the collection of the underground part, because if you are collecting the aerial parts like leaves, fruits or flower, such kind of collection of these parts causes less harm to the plant, whereas collection of the bark or the root, which are the main structures of the plant, they causes substantial damage to the plant. So in the second picture you can see, if you want to collect the root of a particular plant, you should not collect the main root system of the plant. You should always dug out the lateral roots, because if you want to collect the main root of the plant, eventually you have to cut down the tree or cut down the plant, and then you have to collect the root system. So it is always advisable to dug out the lateral roots and then cover the hole which you have made to collect the lateral roots. Now after you collect the lateral root, you are keeping the main root system unharmed, thereby allowing the plant to grow, allowing the main root system to develop further lateral roots. So these are few examples of the sustainable collection practices which one should follow when you are collecting the medicinal plant material from the wild sources. And these guidelines suggest that government should regulate the collection of the medicinal plants from the wild. Now apart from introducing the sustainable collection practices, government should also regulate the collection of the medicinal plant. And this regulation can be done in the form of giving permits to the collector. Now permits should be required for any commercial collection of any plant, but these permits are very important for the species which have been categorized as endangered species. Say for example, in India there is a ban on the collection of Rauwolfia species except under permit. So until and unless you do not have a permit, you cannot collect Rauwolfia roots, because the roots are the major plant part of Rauwolfia that is used for medicinal purpose. So if you do not have a relevant permit, a legal permit to collect the roots, you cannot collect the roots of Rauwolfia species. Now the major advantage of this permit is that it provides flexibility to the regulatory agencies in order to conserve the medicinal plant species. And how they provide the flexibility? Say for example, a particular area is growing a specific medicinal plant species, and to collect that, permit has been given to the collectors. So collector will collect the medicinal plant species from that area under that permit. But over the period of time, due to the continuous collection, the agencies will notice that there is a significant drop in the population of that particular species. If that drop in the population is below the threshold value, which is obviously specified by the agencies, then rather than banning the complete collection of that plant, agencies can stop giving the permit of collection for that particular medicinal plant species for a specified period of time. And this specified period of time should be enough for that particular species to replenish itself, to further increase the population of that particular species. So once the population is enough for allowing the further collection, then again permits can be issued for collecting the particular plant species. So this is how basically permit provides the flexibility. Another example is, say for example, a medicinal plant species grow in 3 or 4 geographical regions. Say for example, some areas of Madhya Pradesh, some areas of Rajasthan and some areas of Gujarat. Now by virtue of large collection rates of that species, the species population go below the threshold level in the Madhya Pradesh region. So what agencies can do, they can stop providing the permits in the Madhya Pradesh region, whereas they can allow the collection under permit in the Rajasthan belt or in the Gujarat belt. So the collectors which were relying on the areas of Madhya Pradesh, they can now collect the same species from either from Gujarat or from Rajasthan. So in this manner, how this permit system provides flexibility, which and is considered much better than the blanket ban which is sometimes given by the government agencies in order to preserve that particular species population in a specified area. Now regulations that are being designed by these agencies should take account of the part of the plant that is being used and of the capacity of the plant to regenerate afterward. So as I have discussed, that if the aerial parts of a particular plant are used, like leaves are there, fruits are there, or flowers are there, which causes less harm to the plant, their collection causes less harm to the plant vis-a-vis to the stem region or the root region of the plant. So regulation should consider which type of the part is collected from the plant, and accordingly they have to modify their guidelines, accordingly they have to regulate the guidelines, they frame the guidelines, frame the policies for the collection. They should also take into consideration the harvesting practices. Again, the sustainable collection or the harvesting practices should be followed. They should educate the people, these guidelines should educate the people about the proper sustainable practices, collection methods for the plant species. And these collection practices, these harvesting practices vary from part to part. Say for example, in case of roots we have discussed, in case of bark we have discussed. So depending upon the plant part that has to be collected, regulation should consider that particular plant part, and they should specify the appropriate method of its collection. These regulations should also respect the ethical, legal and social interest of all those concerned, in particular those living in the areas where these plants are native, where these plants grow naturally, they grow wildly, because certain ethnical people, certain tribal people, they consider certain plants very sacred. So therefore the regulatory agencies who are framing the guideline for the collection of that particular species, they should respect those emotions of those ethnical or the tribal people, and they should prevent or they should allow the collection of that species in a very regulated or a controlled manner. They should also consider the legal aspects of certain species. If a government has banned the collection of a specific product or a plant part of a particular species, then the regulation should clearly mention that aspect. Say for example, in India we have completely banned the collection of the Google resin from the wild trees or the wild population of the Google trees, and the collection only from the cultivated sources is allowed. Such kind of legal aspects should also be considered while framing these guidelines. Then social interest. Certain medicinal plants or certain trees, they have not only the economical value of the people who are living in that particular area, but certain emotions are also attached with some of the trees. Therefore, these regulatory agencies should also consider the social interest of the people who are living in the near vicinity of the area where these kind of medicinal plant species or trees are growing under the natural habitat or growing under wild conditions. Now these regulations should be boosted by the public information campaigns to convince traders and the users of the need to conserve and wild stock. Now this aspect is more important, because whatever government can do, if the government is still doing that, it is not enough to achieve the goals until and unless we do not get support from the public, we do not get support from the user, we do not get support from the local people from where that plant is cultivated. And that is why I stressed upon the competent people who are working in national herbariums, botanical gardens or horticultural institutes, research institutes. They should come forward, they should convince the trader about the sustainable collection practices, how these practices can protect the plant, how these practices can allow these traders to have the supply of the raw material for longer duration, how they can educate the users who will be using the raw material, how they can educate the local people for the need of conservation of these important medicinal plants, not as I stressed upon, not only for the ecological balance, not only for the maintenance of the biodiversity, but also to fulfill the medical need of the people. So here comes the major role of all these competent people. They should come forward, they should educate the people, they should design certain campaigns wherein you can educate the people, you can educate all the stakeholders in this process. Then the guidelines also suggest that the government should prohibit the collection from the wild of the threatened medicinal plant species. If a particular species has been categorized under threatened category or extinct category or extinct in wild category, then the government should completely ban the collection of such species from the wild sources. But they can allow the collection if the collection is in small amount for propagation, or you can say that amount is collected as a propagating material, or that plant material which is collected in small amount is for research purpose, and this collection has to be done by the qualified staff under permit, because without permit you cannot even collect the small amount for propagation or for research, and should not further endanger the wild plant. So such kind of collection, if you are collecting even in the small amounts, this should not endanger the species towards extinction. So such precautions one has to take. Government agencies have to take such kind of precautions. The legislation should ban not only the collection but also the possession and trade of those plants if collected from the wild. So whatever guidelines are framed, whatever rules are framed, they should not only ban the collection but also the possession of the banned material if that material is lying with certain trader or lying in a retailer shop. Such kind of possession should also be considered as an offence, and appropriate penalty has to be implied on the trader or on the retailer. The legislation should include a prohibition over landowners for collecting material of the plant concerned on their land. And this rule implies on a people who are owning a piece of land and the species in question is growing naturally over that particular piece of land. So landowners should also be prohibited for collecting the plant material, that particular plant material, or they should be prohibited from allowing the collection of that particular medicinal plant species which is growing on their piece of land. So when the collection of a plant used by the traditional practitioner is banned, measures should be taken to provide them with alternative species that contain product of similar effect. Because if a medicinal plant species is banned and that species is being used by a certain traditional practitioner for medicinal value, for making traditional medicine, then he should not be the sufferer. So alternative species should be suggested to him. He must be educated about those alternative species which have almost similar kind of the effect as that of the species which is under question. And the government should also control the trade in the medicinal plant and their product. Now the trade in the medicinal plant should be fully controlled, mostly seen in for the trade in and out of the country, which is normally regulated by the customs and not the local trade. Now we know that medicinal plants are not only used by the traditional practitioner in our country, but these plant species are also utilized by the practitioners in other countries or by the herbal drug industries which are in some other country. And therefore the trade of the medicinal plants should be completely regulated by the regulatory agencies, by the government agencies through the customs. Then the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, which is a global organization, we also call it as CITES. It is having around 150 member nations, and this organization, that is CITES, it controls the movement of large number of plant species which are listed on appendices, mainly the species which are threatened by trade and relatives that are difficult to distinguish from them. So CITES is a global agency which controls the movement or the trade of number of medicinal plant species which are listed in their different appendices 1, 2 and 3. They basically control the trade across the countries, and these medicinal plant species are enlisted in these appendices depending upon the level of the protection they require. So in Appendix 1, the species it includes the species which are threatened with extinction, and trade in specimens of these species is permitted only in the exceptional circumstances. Otherwise, trade of such specimens is completely banned. Then in Appendix II, the species which are included in this appendix not necessarily are threatened with extinction, but in which trade must be controlled in order to avoid utilization incompatible with their survival. Though the species are not threatened to extinction, but they are exploited by the trade, and such kind of overexploitation should be controlled, and the species which are under this category, they have been enlisted in Appendix II. And the list of these Appendix 1 and 2 are modified from time to time. The member countries, if they want any change, they propose that particular change in the list. This list comes in the joint meeting of all the members, and the acceptance of the changes are subject to the voting. If majority of the members they vote yes, the changes proposed by a particular country are accepted, then those changes are incorporated in those list. Now the third appendix, it contains the species that are protected in at least one country which has asked other side parties or countries for assistance in controlling the trade. So this is this kind of appendix is also can also be subjected to the change. The list can also be subjected to change from time to time, but the procedure of change is quite different from Appendix 1 and 2, because in Appendix 1 and 2 they contain species which are towards extinction or are more threatened in comparison to the species which are enlisted in Appendix 3. And therefore the changes in Appendix 3 are more of a unilateral type, in which amendments can be done by the desired country. A specimen of the site listed species may be imported into or exported from a state party to the conventional only if the appropriate document has been obtained and presented for the clearance at the port of entry or exit, and these documents are obviously checked by the customs. And every country has its own laws, and therefore there is a large variation in the legal requirements, in the requirements for the import or export of the country. So if somebody is exporting or importing a particular medicinal plant species, he should always take into consideration the laws of or the local national laws of that particular country from where he is importing or to the country where he is exporting. So friends, this was about the utilization. Again, we are talking about the utilization of that information. So in the continuing lecture, we will discuss about the other aspects of the conservation. Thank you.